It was a strange, cold winter day in a small town in Southern California. Shop owners were shoveling up snow onto the sidewalks and sprinkling salt onto the icy paths. Cars were driving by on the slushy wet road, and people were shivering as they walked down in the cold breeze. Craig had parked near a coffee shop intending to get his usual latte. He looked out onto the streets and watched all the people that were walking by. He eyed a woman walking out of the coffee shop, taking a sip from her cup. She was dressed nicely and had long braided blonde hair. Not this one. Craig rolled down his window just a bit to look out. He spotted another young woman walking down the path, knocking her heels. As she passed by Craig, he turned around to watch her go down the road. Not that one either. Craig leaned back in the driver's seat. It was chilly out. He wanted to get out of here soon, but there was still something he needed to do. He stared at a young woman standing on the other side of the road at the bus stand. She was wearing a hat snug on her head. Her jacket was zipped up all the way, and her gloved hands were shivering as she held a big umbrella. She kept looking out onto the road and checking her watch, waiting for the bus. Craig looked closely and tried to see her face. The young woman was very attractive. Her tufts of dark brown hair hung on her shoulders. This wasn't the first time Craig was watching this beautiful woman. He had noticed her quite often, waiting at the bus stand in the mornings. Craig smirked as he watched the woman through his car windows. He muttered to himself, perhaps she's going to be my next target. Craig drove his car around to the other side of the street, slowing down near where the young woman stood. He rolled down his window and said, "It's really cold out, and I've noticed you've been waiting here for quite some time now. How about I give you a lift?" Craig ushered the woman with his hands and unlocked his door. The young woman said, No, it's all right. My bus will be here any time now." Craig said, "The weather is very bad. I think it will be a while till the bus comes. I have seen you before, and I have some time. Let me help you out." The young woman held her umbrella and replied, "Thank you, but I'll be fine." Craig chuckled as he took out his wallet and pulled out a card. "Don't be scared. Here's my card. I'm a lawyer. You can always trust a doctor and a lawyer." Craig reached out of his window and gave the woman his card. She looked at the card for a while and then checked her watch. She sighed and said, "All right, let's go." The young woman got into the car and shut the doors. Craig asked her, "So where will I drop you?" The young woman pointed towards the curb up front and said, "I'll show you the way." Craig drove forward and halted the car at the red light. "I'm Craig. I work at a law firm downtown." "Oh, you saw the card already," he chuckled. The young woman said, "Thanks for the lift. I'm Jessica. I'm Professor of Art 110 at the University of BII. Craig raised his brow. "Wow, I've never met such a young professor before. Impressive." Craig watched Jessica as she sat in the seat next to her. She didn't pay heed to what he said. She still held onto her umbrella and looked outside, desperate to get out. Jessica didn't want to accept the stranger's offer, but the business card Craig had shown her looked legitimate. Jessica was already late. Craig sat back in his seat and wondered to himself that he had to make a good impression before he could make this girl his next target. It had been quite a while since the last girl he had picked earlier this winter. Craig had a strange sense of humor. He became amused by scaring his targets before victimizing them. He cleared his voice and said, "What is wrong with Southern California lately? I've never seen these kind of winter storms before. And the crimes that have been going on?" Jessica looked confused. "What? Has something happened? I've been living here for years now. It's a good neighborhood." Craig began driving again and said, "Oh, you don't know then? There has been a serial killer out on the loose." Jessica raised her brow. She suddenly regretted getting into this car. This man couldn't find anything better to talk about? She looked out the window and murmured, "I've never heard anyone talking about it." Craig replied, "Are you sure? Don't you watch the news? It's been happening for the past 2 years now. Well, maybe it's because you're not really in the field of law. This is what I do for a living, so I find myself wrapped up in many of these cases." Jessica pointed to the left again. She tried to picture the town map in her head. She began pondering on the best route she could take. "It's this way. So, how far along are the police in catching the guy behind this?" Craig turned his car and responded, "So far, the police have found the bodies from the past 2 winters." Jessica said, "How do you know it's one person who did all of the crimes, and not separate incidents?" Craig drove out onto the highway. By the modus operandi, it's not hard to tell. Jessica asked with a confused look on her face, "Modus operandi? What's that?" Craig replied, "That's how you know it's a serial killing. Every one of these culprits have their own signature. They commit each crime in a similar manner. Like, for example, the famous Ted. I'm sure you've heard of him. His victims were generally dark-haired, attractive women. Then there was Robert H. His victims would also be women. His modus operandi was that he took the women to remote places before he hunted them down. And who could forget Mr. Gein's case? He was sick in his head. After his mother died, he went insane and took down women that resembled his mother. So you see, these culprits had their own modus operandi." Jessica was becoming nervous. She took a quick glance at Craig, who was staring out onto the road. She didn't feel too safe anymore. She had most of the characteristics of the victims Craig had mentioned. She started to panic and wondered how she could get out of the car as soon as she could. Jessica asked, "So what is the modus operandi of the guy in our town?" Craig continued, "The modus operandi of this guy is that he usually targets his victims in the coldest 3 months of winter, once every month. November, December, and January. His victims are later found in the trunks of cars." Jessica took a relieved breath and said, "Oh, so that means you're not the psycho guy. Looks like I'm safe." Craig shook his head. "Not really. It's almost the end of January. It's not over yet." Jessica had had it with this strange man. She began to panic. In a stern voice, she said, "Stop the car. I want to get out." Craig said, "Why? What's wrong?" Jessica demanded, "Is this even your car? Show me your license and registration." Craig slowed down the car and chuckled. Was it because of the stories? And of course this is my car. Look, it was just a silly joke. Craig took his car to the side of the empty highway road. He looked around. It was quiet. There wasn't any traffic. He thought to himself it was a good thing they were alone. He didn't want anyone spotting a woman yelling in his car. He pulled out his license and car papers and handed them to Jessica. "I'm telling you, it was a silly joke. I was just trying to scare you. I'm not a killer. I'm a lover." "How about I prove it to you? What do you want me to do?" Jessica examined the license. "All right. Now at least I know you are who you claim to be, and that this is your car." Craig said, "Great. Now can we go?" Jessica peered out the car window. If Craig did something to her, no one will hear her cry. She said, "No, unless you show me your trunk, I will not go with you." Craig laughed out. "Are you serious?" Jessica looked at him sternly. Craig raised his hand and said, "All right, but if I show you my trunk and there is nothing there, then what will I get in return?" Jessica was becoming sick of this man. She regretted having accepted the offer and getting into his car. She had to save something that was greater than her life. She had to figure some way to fool this man and get out of the car. She smiled and said, "If there's nothing in your trunk, I'll give you a surprise." When Craig started unlocking his car, Jessica finally got some relief. Perhaps this would be her chance. Jessica grabbed her bag and her umbrella and scrambled out of the car as quick as she could. The two walked around to the rear of the car. Jessica stood behind Craig as he opened his trunk. Look, nothing is there. I told you before. I'm not a killer. I'm a lover. She was relieved to find the space absolutely empty. There was nothing inside, not even a bag. Jessica held her umbrella tight. She couldn't get out of here without doing this. She struck Craig on his head. Craig fell into his car's trunk. Everything was going dark in front of his eyes, and he felt wetness trickle down his forehead. The last words he heard was Jessica speaking to him. "You're wrong, lawyer. The modus operandi of this town's serial killings isn't that the victims are found in the trunks of cars. The modus operandi is that the car owners are found in their cars' trunks. And the preys are not always women. Sometimes, the perpetrators are women." Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.